"Amanda, you need to leave. Only family is allowed." My father said that directly to my face at my own sister's luxury wedding, right after I had flown 16 agonizing hours across the country just to be there. I was standing freezing on a sweeping gravel driveway lined with glowing magnolias, my Samsonite suitcase still gripped tightly in my hand, listening to a live string quartet play through the glass doors of a beautiful venue I wasn't allowed to step inside. My mother stood right near the grand entrance, watching me like a complete stranger through the window, and did absolutely nothing. Just a few days later, my phone rang about a devastating bill, a massive $42,000 contract with my deeply forged signature sitting right on the bottom line, paying for a party I was just thrown out of. What I pulled out of my folder next made my entire family go completely terrifyingly silent. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you all are. My name is Amanda. I'm 35. I work in compliance consulting out of Los Angeles. Let me take you back to 5 months ago. It was the day I received a wedding invitation I never ever should have trusted. Growing up in the Sullivan house meant living in a split reality. There were two totally different childhoods happening under the exact same roof. First, there was my younger sister Penelope's version. Her world was filled with sparkling homecoming dresses and a shiny used Hyundai Sonata waiting in the driveway on her 17th birthday. It was all paid for by a father who proudly called her my little star, without a single ounce of irony. Then, there was my version. My reality was sitting alone at the public library until closing time, filling out my own college applications in total silence. Nobody ever reminded me the deadlines were coming. Nobody asked if I needed help. If I don't do this, I used to think no one will. My father, George, ran a small building supply store on the south side of Charleston. If you heard him talk about it, you'd think he was a billionaire running an empire. But the truth was far sadder. It was just a cold cinder block building with a badly leaking roof and 4 part-time workers who never stayed longer than a single season. My mother, Diane, just kept the house and kept the peace. In our family, keeping the peace mostly meant agreeing with whatever wild thing George said, and pushing any stress or anger toward the path of least resistance. That path was almost always me. Penelope was 4 years younger than me, effortlessly charming, and she honestly believed the world spun around her just because she deserved it. I don't say that to be bitter. I say it because it was the golden rule of our house. It was the soil that everything else grew from. So I packed up and left home at 19. I had a partial scholarship to the College of Charleston, and a tiny savings account I had scraped together from tutoring kids. Nobody drove me to my new campus. Nobody helped me carry my boxes into the dorm. I didn't even expect them to. I am on my own, I promised myself, and I am going to be fine. 8 years ago, at 28, I finally made it out of the South completely. I took a great position with Wakefield and Cross Consulting in Los Angeles. I became a compliance analyst. It's the kind of intense work where you read massive contracts line by line, searching for secrets, lies, and things that simply don't belong. I was incredibly good at it. Looking back, I realize I'd been training to spot lies my entire life without even knowing it. I worked hard and bought a beautiful 1-bedroom condo in Century City. It was small, clean, and completely mine. Every single square foot was paid for with money I earned with my own 2 hands. I didn't just leave home. Home left me first. Then the invitation arrived on a quiet Wednesday in late October. It was tucked inside a thick, heavy cream envelope with a shiny foil-pressed return address. Cross & Company stationery. As soon as I held it, I recognized the weight. Somebody had spent serious money on this. Inside was a formal invitation to the wedding of Penelope Sullivan and Thomas Richmond. The location? The Wellington Manor in Charleston, South Carolina, November 15th. Black tie optional. I looked the place up online. It was a stunning restored plantation-style venue with glittering crystal chandeliers, perfectly manicured boxwood gardens, and a starting price of $28,000. For a family that couldn't even afford to fix the broken AC in their failing supply store, this was an insane reach. Where was the money coming from? But what actually made my heart stop was the little note Penelope had tucked inside. It was handwritten on a separate crisp white card in her familiar loopy script. It wouldn't be complete without you. Please come. Mans, P. 8 long years. In 8 years, my parents had only called me when they desperately needed something. A question about co-signing a loan, which George quickly backed out of. An opinion on a confusing medical bill my mother wanted me to translate. Penelope only called on birthdays. Sometimes Thanksgiving was just a lazy group text. And now this. a fancy invitation and a deeply personal note. A request that sounded almost like they actually wanted me there, like it meant something. Maybe they miss me, a quiet voice in my head whispered. Maybe they've finally changed. I booked the flight that very weekend. LAX to Charleston International. Economy class. $1,600 round trip. I told myself I wasn't going because I'd forgiven them. I told myself I just wanted to see if they were different. There is a massive difference between forgiveness and curiosity, and I was holding on to curiosity with both hands. When I told my closest friend from college, Rebecca Taylor, who was now a sharp paralegal living in Charleston, she immediately texted me back. "You're actually going?" Bold move. I really should have listened to the warning in her tone. I landed at Charleston International on a Thursday evening in November. The busy terminal smelled like dark roasted Starbucks coffee and sharp jet fuel. Stepping out, everything felt deeply familiar, yet totally alien. The slow southern drawl of the gate agents, the thick humidity that clung to my skin even in the middle of autumn. It all rushed back. I picked up a rental car at the Avis counter and drove straight to the Courtyard Marriott near the historic district. I never ever stayed at my parents' house when I visited. That boundary had been set in stone for years, and nobody even questioned it anymore. I stared out the windshield at the dark, winding southern roads, telling myself this weekend would finally heal the past. I had absolutely no idea I was driving straight into a trap that would tear my life apart. From the quiet hotel room, sitting on the edge of the mattress, I dialed my sister. The line rang 6 long times. When Penelope finally picked up, her voice was way too bright, stretched thin like a rubber band about to snap. "Hey, you made it." "Just checked in," I replied, trying to sound casual, searching her tone for any warmth. "Anything I should know about tomorrow?" "Just be at the venue by 3. Ceremony starts at 4. Her tone was clipped, rushed. She's in a room full of people, my brain quickly calculated. She doesn't want them to hear what she's saying to me. Got to go. Rehearsal stuff. See you tomorrow. The line went dead before I could even take a breath. Next I called my mother. Diane answered on the 3rd ring. Her very first sentence sank into my chest like a heavy stone dropping into a quiet pond. "Oh, you actually came?" "Excuse me?" I flew across the country. "Mom, I thought, well, the flight was so long, I figured you'd change your mind." I sat frozen on the bed, my expensive Balenciaga trench coat still on, my Samsonite suitcase standing untouched by the door. I let her awful words settle in the stuffy room. She didn't say she was glad to hear my voice. She didn't say she couldn't wait to see me. She openly admitted she had hoped I wouldn't show up at all. I briefly told her I'd be at the venue at 3 and ended the call. Something was terribly wrong. You can feel it, can't you? Like the air pressure dropping right before a massive storm hits. Nothing was visibly broken yet, but there was an invisible shift making my ears literally ring. Sleep barely found me that night. Sunday, November 15th arrived. I put on a tailored navy dress I had bought on Rodeo Drive specifically for this exact moment. Low heels, simple pearl studs, nothing flashy, just classy enough to silently prove I belonged somewhere without looking like I was trying too hard. The Wellington Manor was breathtaking. It sat grandly at the end of a long, sweeping gravel driveway lined with towering magnolias, their bare branches wrapped in twinkling white lights. Through the massive front windows, I could see the warm, golden flicker of crystal chandeliers. A live string quartet was warming up somewhere out of sight, the soft, elegant notes of Pachelbel drifting over the perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges. It's beautiful. Maybe this is the fresh start we all need. Then I saw my father. George wasn't inside cheerfully greeting the arriving guests. He wasn't standing near the altar waiting to give his youngest daughter away. He was standing outside on the crunching gravel, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a dark charcoal vest I had never seen before. He was positioned right next to a leased Cadillac Escalade that still had the shiny dealer plates attached to the bumper. He spotted me walking up. He immediately stepped forward, blocking my path. "Amanda, you need to leave." I stopped dead in my tracks, the music suddenly fading into the background. "Excuse me? Only family is allowed. You weren't invited." My brain stalled. "What?" I reached into my purse, my fingers trembling, and pulled out the thick cream paper. "I have the actual foil-pressed Cross & Company invitation right here, Dad. It has my name on it." His eyes were ice cold. "That was a mistake. You shouldn't have come." I looked past his broad shoulder. Through the gleaming glass doors, I could clearly see Penelope wearing a stunning white Valentino gown, throwing her head back and laughing with a bridesmaid. And there was Diane, standing near the grand entrance in a beautiful lavender mother-of-the-bride dress. My mother was staring right at us through the window. She didn't step outside to intervene. She didn't wave. She just watched. "Dad, don't make a scene," George hissed quietly. "The guests are inside. Walk away." I didn't beg him. I absolutely refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Do not give him the satisfaction. I turned around in total silence, grabbed the handle of my Samsonite, dragged it back across the harsh gravel, and marched straight to my rental car. The tears didn't fall until the doors were securely locked and the engine was roaring, and even then, sobbing against the steering wheel, I wasn't crying over missing a wedding. I wept because I had actually let my guard down. I cried because I had been stupid enough to hope. Back at the Marriott, I sat completely still on the bed in that same expensive navy dress. My shoes were still on. I stared blankly at a muted television screen for what felt like an eternity. The stuffy room smelled strongly of cheap industrial carpet cleaner and the tiny lavender sachet I always kept inside my carry-on bag. It was a million miles away from the elegant chandeliers and classical music. At 9 o'clock, I finally dialed Rebecca. "They did what?" Her voice sliced through the speaker, sharp enough to cut solid glass. I poured out everything. George acting like a bouncer at the gate, Diane watching me like a stranger through the glass, Penelope laughing inside her expensive gown while I was tossed out like trash, holding an invitation they refused to honor. "I want to go home," I whispered, my throat tight. "I'm rebooking my flight right now." Do not leave yet," Rebecca ordered firmly. "Amanda, listen to me closely. This whole setup doesn't make any sense. They mailed you a high-end invitation. Penelope wrote you a sweet personal note. You flew 16 hours and then they suddenly bounce you at the door?" I heard the solid clink of her setting a heavy coffee mug onto a desk. "People do not do insane things like that unless they desperately need something from you, or unless they are hiding a massive secret." I wanted to fight her on it. I wanted to explain that my relatives were perfectly capable of delivering casual, brutal cruelty for absolutely no reason. That sometimes people crush you simply because they have the power to do it, and because you happen to be standing there. But Rebecca had spent 7 tough years working as a paralegal. Her brain was trained to hear the dark truth hiding underneath the lies. "Just give it a few days," she pleaded softly. "Stay put in Charleston. If the weekend passes and nothing weird happens, fly back to LA on Monday." But my gut says something else is coming. I can feel it. I really didn't believe her. I opened my laptop, pulled up the Delta Airlines website, and frantically scrolled through the available seats for the very next morning. My shaking finger hovered right over the confirm purchase button, but I couldn't click it. Maybe a tiny part of me felt the trapdoor waiting beneath my feet too. Suddenly my cell phone vibrated violently against the mattress. It wasn't a phone call. It was an urgent, flashing push notification from my Experian credit monitoring app. Critical alert. New hard credit inquiry. $42,000 via Wellington Manor events. My blood instantly turned to ice. The breath hitched painfully in my dry throat. Oh my God. They didn't just reject me, they used me. I wasn't going to sit around for 4 days staring at a popcorn ceiling while my financial future was hijacked. I didn't wait 4 days. I didn't wait 4 minutes. I stayed locked inside the Marriott, working remotely from the tiny desk by the window. I buried myself in reviewing complex audit files for a client in Geneva who had no idea my personal life was exploding. That was the bizarre comfort of compliance work. Corporate contracts don't have messy feelings, they simply state the cold facts. On Tuesday, I made the huge mistake of opening Instagram. Penelope's feed had completely blown up. There were pictures of the stunning Wellington Manor glowing in the golden afternoon light. Shots of her and Thomas kissing under a massive arch of imported white roses. The wedding cake had 6 giant tiers. The fancy buttercream frosting alone probably cost $2,500. The captions were flooded with hashtags. #Sullivan Wedding, #The Perfect Day, #Forever Richmond. Out of 47 uploaded photos, there was not a single glimpse of me, not one passing mention. It was as though I simply did not exist. As though I had never flown across the country, or stood shivering on that gravel drive holding an invitation that was supposed to mean I belonged. Then, I scrolled down and saw my mother's post. Diane had proudly uploaded a sweet photo collage. Penelope as a chubby baby. Penelope going to prom. Penelope walking down the aisle with George, and right at the bottom, a faded, old picture of me and Penelope as little kids, maybe 9 and 5 years old, sitting together on a porch in matching floral sundresses. The caption read, "So proud of both my girls today." I glared at the word both until the letters blurred and lost all meaning. She posted that specific phrase for her eager audience of nosy cousins and old neighbors who followed her online. She was desperately controlling the narrative. Diane couldn't easily explain why her eldest daughter was mysteriously missing from every single wedding photo, so she dug a decade deep into the family archives to present fake proof of a loving bond that had died years ago. Right below that, Penelope posted a smug teaser video. Honeymoon countdown, Bora Bora, here we come. The location was tagged at an ultra-luxury Fairmont resort. I slammed the app closed, shut my laptop hard, and ate a miserable dinner of stale vending machine crackers. Some cruel family performances you are forced to sit and watch. Others, you just have to survive. But surviving wasn't enough anymore. As I stared at the flashing $42,000 alert on my phone screen, the crushed, heartbroken sister inside me finally died, and the ruthless compliance analyst woke up. Wednesday morning arrived, heavy and gray. My cell phone suddenly rang at 10:15. The screen flashed a single word, Mom. I almost didn't answer. Every instinct in my body screamed to ignore it, but the seasoned compliance analyst inside me lives by one strict rule. You never ever dodge a call when you don't know what cards the other side is holding. I swiped the green button. Hello? Amanda? Diane's voice was completely stripped of any normal, motherly warmth. There was no "how are you?" No "did you sleep well?" Just a flat, terrifyingly cold tone. We need to discuss the bill. My eyebrows pulled together. What bill? The venue, the Wellington Manor. A pause followed, thin and sharp as a razor wire. The total is $42,000. How will you pay it? I sat up straighter, my spine locking into place. Mom? What on earth are you talking about? I didn't hire a venue. You signed the contract. You're the guarantor. Your name is on the agreement. The entire hotel room seemed to tilt sideways. The floor dropped out from under me. What? I never signed anything. I wasn't asked to sign anything. I didn't even know there was a contract. I heard frantic shuffling on the other end of the line. Then George's voice barked out, hard and uncomfortably close to the microphone. He had snatched the phone right out of her hand. Don't play dumb with us, Amanda, he growled. Your name is printed on that paper. You are the legal guarantor. You owe this family. I owe this family for a wedding you literally kicked me out of? My voice shook, but not from sadness anymore. It was pure shock. We will talk about that later, he dismissed smoothly. Right now, you need to handle your bill. Dad, listen to me. I didn't sign anything. Then who did? He mocked cruelly. A ghost? Click. He hung up. I sat alone in that quiet hotel room and let his vicious words loop in my mind. Contract. Your signature. Guarantor. I knew exactly what those specific terms meant. I spent my entire career tearing apart legally binding documents. I knew exactly what a forged signature meant under the harsh light of the law. And more importantly, I knew exactly which questions I needed to ask next. That was the exact moment the crying stopped. The deeply wounded daughter retreated, and the cold, focused corporate analyst took the steering wheel. At 11:30 that same morning, I called the Wellington Manor. The cheerful front desk transferred me straight to event coordination. A woman named Kelly Miller picked up. Her voice was highly professional and perfectly measured, the exact kind of calm tone used to manage hundreds of anxious, screaming brides without ever flinching. Miss Miller, my name is Amanda Sullivan. I'm calling regarding the Sullivan-Richmond wedding held at your lovely venue on November 15th. I understand there is a guarantor agreement associated with that specific event. Yes, Kelly replied smoothly, checking her computer. We do have a guarantor on file for that booking, and Amanda Sullivan, that is my name. But I did not sign that document. Absolute silence fell over the line. It was the terrifying kind of quiet that tells you someone just stopped typing mid-sentence. Miss Sullivan, Kelly said, her voice dropping a fraction. Can you repeat that? I am telling you that I never signed a guarantor agreement for this wedding. I was not asked, and I was not physically present. I would like to formally request a copy of the document. More heavy silence. Then she spoke very carefully. Ma'am, if what you are saying is accurate, this would be a very serious matter for our legal department. Suddenly a harsh click echoed on the line. A deep, highly aggressive male voice cut Kelly off completely. Miss Sullivan, I am Marcus Vance, Director of Finance for Wellington Manor. His tone cracked like a whip inside my small room. We deal with nasty cases of buyer's remorse all the time, but let me make myself absolutely clear. If you are trying to back out of a legally binding contract, we won't just sue you. I stopped breathing. He's threatening me. I see you work as a compliance analyst for Wakefield and Cross Consulting out in Los Angeles, Marcus snarled. If this massive balance isn't settled by tomorrow, I will personally contact your HR department. I will report a gross financial fraud committed by one of their own employees. We will see exactly how long you keep your fancy six-figure job then. The threat hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. My entire career, the safe, beautiful life I had built to escape Charleston, was suddenly resting on the chopping block because of my father's lies. You can't do that, I demanded, my voice tight with panic. I never signed it. You didn't have to be here to sign it, Marcus snapped back. We have the power of attorney you emailed to us, granting your father full authorization to sign on your behalf. We have it sitting right here. Sent from your personal address, amanda.sullivan.legal@gmail.com. Do not play games with me, Miss Sullivan. My mind spun. A fake email address. A fake power of attorney. They planned this. I understand, I replied, forcing my voice to drop into a dead, emotionless calm. I am officially requesting a copy through whatever formal channel you require. I can provide government-issued identification to verify that I am exactly who I say I am. Kelly took over, nervously explaining the process. I had to submit a written request, include a clear copy of my passport for identity verification, and their legal team would email a scanned copy within 72 hours. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and drafted the formal request letter in under 15 minutes. I attached a high-resolution scan of my passport's photo page and sent it via certified email. But my trembling fingers were flying across the laptop keyboard now. I didn't stop at the venue contract. The adrenaline was pumping way too hard through my veins. If George was bold enough to create a fake email and a fake legal document, what else had he secretly done? As a trained compliance expert, I knew exactly where the bodies were buried. I ran a deep dive, forensic background check on my own social security number through all 3 major credit bureaus. The blue progress bar spun slowly on my screen. Please, let it just be the venue. Please. When the final results loaded, the room tilted violently again. It wasn't just the $42,000 venue fee. Staring back at me was a second, freshly approved personal loan from a local Charleston credit union. It was for $15,000, filed cleanly under my name for floral and catering expenses. My father hadn't just used me as a convenient guarantor. He had actively, maliciously stolen my identity to finance his entire golden illusion. I called Rebecca immediately. It's real, I choked out, staring blindly at the horrifying numbers on the screen. There is a contract with my name on it, and I never signed it. And Rebecca, they took out a $15,000 personal loan in my name too. Rebecca was perfectly quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Okay, she said, her tone shifting into pure steel. Now, we work. I had exactly 72 hours before the contract copy arrived. 72 hours to prepare for a brutal war I never asked for. But my parents had made one fatal miscalculation. They thought they had stolen the identity of a helpless, lonely daughter. They had no idea they had just handed a loaded gun to a master of compliance. The phone calls started rolling in on Thursday morning like a highly coordinated military strike. Aunt Catherine went first. Her voice carried that warm but incredibly firm tone of a woman who had already rehearsed her speech in the mirror. Amanda, honey, your mother is completely beside herself. She says you promised to cover the venue and now you're backing out. I know things are complicated right now, but please think about your parents' health. I didn't promise anything, my mind screamed, but I stayed perfectly silent. I instantly recognized the tactic. Diane had already planted the seeds of a fake story, and it was spreading like wildfire. Uncle Robert followed closely with a massive email. It was 4 dense paragraphs long, all single-spaced. The subject line simply read, "Family first." His core argument was that a family isn't about legal contracts, it's about unconditional love. "Don't let money destroy us," he wrote dramatically. It read exactly like a tragic eulogy for a relationship he and I had never actually shared. Then Cousin Brenda shot me a quick, lazy text. "Just pay it. It's easier for everyone." There were 25 members in the extended Sullivan family. 24 of them were being spoon-fed the exact same toxic narrative. They were told that I had made a beautiful commitment, that I was cruelly breaking it, and that I was a selfish, cold daughter choosing a bank account over my own flesh and blood. They don't even care if it's true, I realized with a heavy heart. They just want the drama to magically disappear. I didn't argue back. I didn't try to defend myself. Compliance training teaches you one vital lesson above all else. Document absolutely everything, especially when the story being told isn't yours. I took a deep breath, steadied my shaking hands, and screenshotted every single message, every voicemail transcript, and every email. Then my screen buzzed with a text from a number I almost didn't recognize. Cousin Derek, hey, something feels really off. Mom keeps saying you promised, but I don't think that's the whole story. Want to talk? Derek was Aunt Catherine's son. He was 27, quiet, and worked in IT. He had always been the silent observer in the family. He was the one who stayed in the shadows and carefully watched while everyone else performed on stage. Meet me at the Starbucks on King Street in 10 minutes, I typed back rapidly. I didn't wait for a reply. I grabbed my coat and practically ran out the door. The stakes were dangerously high now. When I walked into the crowded, noisy coffee shop, Derek was already sitting in a dim corner booth, nervously looking over his shoulder like a man being hunted. He didn't even say hello. He just reached into his jacket pocket and slid a folded, badly crumpled piece of yellow legal paper across the scratched wooden table. I took the trash out at Uncle George's office yesterday, he whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. I slowly unfolded the paper. My heart stopped. It was a practice sheet. Dozens of frantic attempts at forging my signature were scribbled across the page. Someone had been tracing the unique loops and sharp angles in dark blue ink, crossing them out violently, and getting progressively terrifyingly closer to my real handwriting. He spent hours perfecting it, Derek said, his voice laced with absolute disgust. I knew they were lying about you. Take it, Amanda. You are going to need it. I stared down at the visual proof of my father's ultimate betrayal. I saw the cold, calculating effort it took to successfully steal my name. My chest ached, a deep, hollow pain, but I forced the tears down. Thank you, Derek, I whispered softly, carefully folding the golden evidence into my bag. 1 person out of 25, only 1 person actually thought to ask for the truth. I saved our text thread and locked my phone. The real contract was on its way. Penelope called the next day. Friday afternoon, I was sitting at the tiny hotel desk, forcing myself to review a complex risk assessment for work, when her name lit up my glowing screen. Amanda. There was zero warmth in her voice, no gentle sisterly tone. It was just the flat, hard sound of someone calling to aggressively close a business deal. You need to just pay the bill. You make over $250,000 a year. $42,000 is literally like a month's salary for you. I stopped typing. You kicked me out of your wedding, Penelope, and now you expect me to pay for it? That was Dad's decision. I didn't want to, but you didn't stop him either. Silence hung heavily between us. Look, she finally huffed, sounding wildly annoyed. Dad handled the contract months ago. It's done. Just write the check and stop being so dramatic. You can afford it. I leaned back in the cheap desk chair and stared blankly at the ceiling. I focused on the ugly popcorn texture and the faint yellowish water stain near the air vent. $42,000 for a party where I wasn't even allowed to walk past the driveway gravel. Penelope, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. Can you say one honest thing to me? Did you know Dad put my name on that contract? The silence that followed lasted exactly 6 seconds. When your entire world is falling apart, counting to 6 feels like falling down an endless canyon. It doesn't matter, she muttered defensively. It matters to me. You left this family, Amanda, she suddenly exploded. You moved to Los Angeles and completely disappeared. You don't get to come back here and play the victim. I ended the call right then and there. I set the phone face down on the desk. My hands were perfectly steady, not because I was calm, but because a massive, undeniable shift had just occurred inside my soul. She knew. My own sister had known the whole time, and she simply didn't care. Okay, I need to pause the story right here for a quick second. You just heard what Penelope actually said to me. Just write the check. Like a massive $42,000 debt for an event I was humiliated at is just spare pocket change. Here is my question for you, listening right now. If your own sibling called you and delivered that exact line, what would you say back? Option 1, sure, I'll pay it, right after you publicly apologize on camera. Option 2, I would honestly rather set that money on fire. Or option 3, tell me your own creative answer down in the comments. And if you haven't hit subscribe yet, now is the absolute best time, because this story is about to take a massive turn, and the trap my family thinks they are setting for me is about to become their very own prison. Saturday morning, George called again. The loud ringtone shattered the quiet hotel room. This time his voice carried a sharp, jagged edge. It was the specific kind of tone a man puts on when he has desperately rehearsed his lines in the bathroom mirror. I talked to a buddy who does real estate law, he announced, trying to sound massive and powerful. He says the guarantor contract is 100% legally binding. You have 45 days to pay it, or the venue will aggressively pursue legal action against you. A buddy. Not an actual lawyer, just a buddy who does real estate. I almost felt a strange wave of pity for how incredibly thin his bluff really was. Did your buddy also happen to mention what happens if the guarantor's signature was completely forged? I asked softly. Dead air. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that has actual physical weight to it. Nobody forged anything, George finally sputtered, but his voice was noticeably slower now. Weaker. You're making things up just to get out of what you owe. I owe absolutely nothing for a wedding I was locked out of, Dad, and I will have the official contract in my hands by this afternoon. We will see whose name is really written on it. You think you're so smart with your fancy Los Angeles job and your shiny condo? He lashed out, pivoting to pure anger. A judge won't care about any of that. You're welcome to take me to court, but I'd strongly suggest you talk to a real attorney first, not a buddy. You ungrateful. He hung up the phone before he could even finish the sentence. I didn't need him to finish it. I had been called ungrateful so many times in my life that the ugly word had completely lost its sharp edges, like a rough stone tumbled smooth in a river. But here is exactly what my compliance brain noticed. He didn't deny the forgery right away. He deflected. He threatened. He attacked my character. But when I explicitly said the word forged, he went totally silent first. He went completely silent before he managed to say a single word of denial. That panicked hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca texted me right at 1 p.m. Contract should hit your inbox today. Ready? I was born ready, I thought. I had been preparing for this moment since the day I learned how to read the fine print for a living. Diane called that exact same evening. She was alone this time. There was no heavy breathing from George in the background. Her voice had shifted registers entirely. It was softer, dangerously shaky, and deeply threaded with tears that may or may not have been genuine. Amanda, please, I'm begging you, she cried into the receiver. Your father can't even sleep. If the venue takes legal action against us, we could lose the entire house. Mom, you could lose the house because someone actively forged my name on a legal document. Don't use that terrible word. Her voice tightened into a defensive knot. We didn't forge anything. We just used your information because we had absolutely no choice. I closed my eyes. There it was. Buried deep inside a messy denial was a clear, undeniable confession. You had no choice. You had the choice to simply pick up the phone and ask me, I whispered. You would have said no. And that should have been the end of it. A long, trembling breath hissed through the speaker. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking loudly through the phone. It was the exact same brass clock that had hung directly above the stove for my entire childhood. You've always been exactly like this, she spat. And suddenly, all the fake softness completely evaporated. Her tone turned to pure ice. Even as a child, your sister desperately needed this wedding. Your father and our credit is ruined since the business started failing. The venue strictly required a guarantor. We already had your social security number and your old tax records. They were sitting right there in your old bedroom. My stomach violently turned over. So you physically went into my private bedroom, went through my personal documents, forged my name on a binding agreement, and then locked me out of the event so I wouldn't find out? We didn't steal anything. You're our daughter. That's exactly what family does. Family asks, Mom. Family does not steal. You don't know what it's like, she sobbed loudly. You just sit out in Los Angeles in your perfect little condo and you have absolutely no idea what we have been going through down here. I know exactly what you've been going through, I replied coldly, because you just told me. She was crying harder now. I honestly couldn't tell if it was from crushing guilt or just raw frustration that her emotional manipulation wasn't working. I didn't try to comfort her. I just let the heavy silence do all the brutal work. By Sunday morning, the family smear campaign had reached a deafening volume. Aunt Catherine left a voicemail so perfectly polished, it could have been dictated by Diane herself. Think about your parents' health, sweetheart. Your mother has been having chest pains. Is $42,000 really worth destroying your father's fragile heart? Uncle Robert sent a second email. It was much shorter this time, with the bold subject line, disappointed. One specific line jumped out at me like a slap to the face. We didn't raise you to be this kind of cruel person. We. as though that man had ever had any actual hand in raising me at all. Cousin Brenda accidentally forwarded a nasty group text that was clearly meant for someone else. She's being totally impossible. Mom says she won't budge. That meant there was an active family group chat I had never been added to. 24 people all eagerly discussing me, judging me, but not a single one of them actually speaking to me. Then my screen lit up with another message from Derek. Aunt Diane is organizing a giant family brunch next Monday at my mom's house. She keeps telling everyone it's to discuss the situation gently, but from what I'm hearing behind the scenes, I think she is going to pressure you publicly. Heads up. I read the glowing text twice. A family brunch, a captive audience, a beautifully set stage. Diane was busily assembling the jury to publicly execute my character. What my mother didn't know was that the real contract was arriving any hour now, and what she couldn't possibly imagine was that I might confidently walk straight into that sunny brunch holding the only thing she was utterly terrified of, the cold, hard truth on paper. I texted Derek back immediately. I'll be there. Then I called Rebecca. They're officially setting up a public intervention, I told her. Next Monday. Good, Rebecca said instantly. I could practically hear the fierce smile spreading across her face through the phone. Let them. 24 family members, one fake narrative, and not a single person had actually asked to see the physical contract. That was all about to change. But bravery is exhausting. By Sunday night, sitting completely alone in the dark hotel room, I almost quit. I had the Delta Airlines website glowing brightly on my laptop screen. I had selected a seat on the very first Monday morning flight back to LAX. Row 35, aisle seat. The expensive change fee was $310. My mouse cursor hovered right over the bright blue confirm button, trembling like a nervous hand resting on a doorknob. Los Angeles was a safe 16 hours away. My quiet condo, my solid oak desk, my predictable life. That world actually made sense. Why am I fighting a war against people who will never love me? Rebecca showed up at 10 p.m. carrying 2 hot coffees from the lobby. She didn't even knock. She simply used the spare plastic keycard I had given her on Thursday. Close the laptop, she commanded softly, setting the steaming cups on the nightstand. I'm just looking. You're running, she corrected gently, sitting down at the very foot of my bed. And running away is exactly what they are counting on. George is betting everything on the fact that you will fly back to Los Angeles, eat the massive bill quietly to avoid conflict, and never, ever make him explain himself. I don't care about making him explain himself anymore. This isn't about getting an explanation, Amanda. It's about making absolutely sure they can never, ever sign your name again on anything. Ever. That profound sentence landed entirely differently than anything else she had said all week. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. The venue's legal team should be sending the official contract copy by Tuesday at the latest, she promised, her eyes locked on mine. Just wait one more day. I looked back at the glowing computer screen. Row 35A. The painful change fee. The early departure time. One more day, I whispered, the fight slowly returning to my blood. Just one more day. I snapped the laptop shut. Rebecca stayed for another full hour. We didn't talk about the disastrous wedding, the crushing debt, or the looming contract. She calmly told me about a boring new case at her firm, a simple landlord dispute, a frustrated tenant with rent receipts. Normal things. Safe, human things. After she finally left, I lay flat in the pitch dark, listening to the rattling hum of the ice machine down the empty hallway. I didn't sleep. Not really. Because I knew that as soon as the sun came up, the bomb waiting in my inbox was finally going to detonate. But the endless calls and angry texts weren't the end of it. Later that night, exactly 12 hours before the dreaded family brunch, a sharp, frantic knock rattled my hotel room door. I jumped. Who on earth is here at this hour? I crept to the peephole. It was Penelope. Her normally perfect eyes were bloodshot, her dark mascara completely smudged down her cheeks. She looked wild, desperate, and totally unhinged. Let me in, she hissed through the wood, pushing hard past me the second I turned the knob. The trained compliance analyst inside me didn't hesitate for a single microsecond. As I pushed the heavy door shut, my right hand slipped seamlessly into my jacket pocket. My thumb traced the familiar screen in the dark. Swipe, tap, record. The voice memo app began silently spinning. You are ruining my entire life, Amanda, she screamed, pacing back and forth across the cheap industrial carpet like a trapped animal. Thomas is asking me terrible questions about the money. He is absolutely furious. You make a massive salary, just pay the damn loans and shut up. I froze. Loans? Plural? Loans? I asked softly, my voice dangerously steady, gently guiding her right into the invisible trap. Are you talking about the $42,000 venue and the $15,000 personal loan? She scoffed, throwing her manicured hands up in the air with total disgust. Whatever. Dad had to do it. We didn't have a choice. I knew he was using your social security number, but I honestly thought you would just eat the cost to keep the peace. You always just walk away. Why are you doing this to me right now? I stood completely still, staring at the crying woman who shared my DNA. The hidden phone in my pocket was flawlessly capturing every single toxic, selfish syllable of her brutal confession. She knew. She watched me stand out in the cold on the gravel, knowing my stolen money paid for the flowers in her hair. You're right, I said. My voice was as cold as a winter ocean. I stepped smoothly toward the exit and pulled the door wide open. I do walk away. Get out. She glared at me, pure hatred flashing in her eyes, before storming out into the dim hallway. My trap was perfectly set. At 3 a.m, I was still lying flat on top of the hotel comforter. I hadn't changed my clothes. I just stared blankly up at a ceiling I had memorized over 12 lonely nights. I traced the faint water stain near the vent. It looked like a tiny country on a map that nobody ever visits. In the crushing quiet, my mind drifted to a painful place I usually kept locked tightly away. I was 15 years old again. I had just won the regional science fair with a complex project on water filtration. First place in the entire state. The school proudly handed me a small plastic trophy and a printed certificate in a cheap frame. My mother was supposed to sit in the audience for the ceremony. She never showed up. George was supposed to drive me home. Instead, he took Penelope to the mall to buy new shiny soccer cleats. I rode the smelly city bus home completely alone. I held that little plastic trophy in a grocery bag on my lap because it wouldn't fit inside my school backpack. When I finally walked through the front door, I proudly placed the award right on the center of the kitchen counter. But the very next morning, it had been shoved to the top of the dusty refrigerator, hidden directly behind a giant cereal box. Penelope's glossy soccer team photo remained front and center on the fridge door, held up by a star magnet. Lying in that dark hotel room 21 years later, a heavy truth finally settled into my bones. I didn't fly 16 hours to attend a wedding. I flew 16 hours to see if my parents would finally open the door for me. And they hadn't. The cruelest part wasn't being turned away by a bouncer. The deepest wound was realizing I was still that 15-year-old girl, holding a trophy in a plastic bag, foolishly hoping her family would finally clap. At some point, my exhausted body gave out. I must have slept, because I woke up at 8 o'clock sharp with a terrible headache throbbing behind my eyes. My shoes were still strapped to my feet. The coffee Rebecca had left was freezing cold on the nightstand. I grabbed my phone. There was one single notification resting on the screen, an email from the Wellington Manor. The subject line read, "Document request, Sullivan event." I sat up instantly. Everything was about to change. But before I could even tap the glowing attachment, my phone erupted. It was George. 8:15 on a Monday morning. Amanda. His voice carried that practiced, fake steadiness. It was the sound of a man nervously gripping the steering wheel on a road he knows is covered in black ice. I hope you've had time to think clearly about this. The venue has been very patient, but they won't wait forever. Funny you should call me right at this exact minute, I replied softly. There's nothing funny about this, he snapped back. I talked to my buddy again, the real estate guy. He confirmed a guarantor contract is strictly enforceable. You signed it. End of story. Did your buddy also tell you what happens if the guarantor's signature is forged, Dad? I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Because I asked you that specific question last time, and you hung up the phone instead of answering. The pause was much longer this time, 5 agonizing seconds. No one forged anything, he finally choked out. You keep saying that word like it actually means something. It means a felony in the state of South Carolina. That is exactly what it means. Another heavy pause. I could hear his shallow, terrified breathing scratching against the microphone. You want to play lawyer? He bullied weakly. Fine, but don't come crying to me when a judge sees that contract with your name written in black and white. I won't be crying, Dad, because I will be handing over my official passport with my actual legal signature on it. And we will happily let the handwriting experts do the talking. You're unbelievable. After everything I have the contract, by the way, I interrupted smoothly. Silence, total, absolute, suffocating silence. The venue emailed it to me this morning, I whispered into the phone. I am looking directly at the attachment right now. I could hear the wet, sticky sound of him swallowing hard. It was the loudest noise on the entire line. We will see whose story holds up, I finished. He hung up without a single extra word. There was no loud bluster this time. No fake lawyer buddies. No screaming about me being ungrateful. Just a pathetic click and then a dead dial tone. I opened the email, but I didn't click on the attached PDF just yet. I desperately needed coffee first. I needed my hands to be completely steady. While the little hotel Keurig machine sputtered and brewed, my phone lit up again. It was Derek. He had sent a new photo. It was a screenshot captured directly from the secret family group chat, the private thread I was never allowed to join. I zoomed in tight on the screen and read the horrifying messages. Diane, Amanda officially refused to honor her sweet commitment. She's always been incredibly selfish. I honestly don't know where George and I went wrong with her. George. She makes over $250,000 and won't even help her own little sister. Let that sink in, folks. Penelope. I really didn't want to say this out loud, but she's always been deeply jealous of me, even when we were tiny kids. Aunt Catherine, maybe we should all just go completely no contact with her. She clearly doesn't value family at all. Uncle Robert, heartbreaking. George and Diane deserve so much better. 24 people. All of them eagerly building a monstrous version of me that simply did not exist, a selfish, freezing cold, jealous woman who broke a sacred promise and abandoned her baby sister, a wealthy villain who actively chose cruelty over love. Not a single one of those people had asked to see the real contract. Not one of them demanded proof. They didn't need boring facts, they just wanted a juicy story, and lies are always much easier to swallow when they are baked and served by your own mother. My fingers flew across the screen. I screenshotted the entire thread, every nasty message, every single timestamp. Then I opened a secure folder and organized them chronologically. Document absolutely everything, especially when the narrative is being written to destroy you. Derek sent a quick follow-up text. Sorry, I just thought you really needed to see it. Thank you, I replied honestly. I mean it, he sent back. Whatever you are planning to do today, I am on your side. I set the hot phone down on the desk. I looked over at the bright laptop screen where the email from the Wellington Manor was waiting patiently. One single PDF file. 12 pages of legal ruin. My family was extremely busy writing the fictional story of who I was. But they had absolutely no idea that I was about to drop a bomb that would shatter their fake world into a million pieces. I clicked on the attached PDF. Page 1 appeared. Venue details, the Wellington Manor. November 15th, Sullivan Richmond wedding. Event package Grand Magnolia. Total cost $42,000. Page 2, payment terms. 60% non-refundable deposit due upon initial signing, remainder due in full within 45 days post-event. Then, my heart hammered hard against my rib cage. Page 3 loaded on the bright screen. Guarantor agreement. It was a completely separate signature page, looking perfectly clean and horribly official. The heavy legal text read, I, Amanda Sullivan, hereby guarantee full and complete payment of the remaining venue balance in the specific event that the primary contracting parties fail or default. And there, sitting right at the very bottom line, was a signature, Amanda Sullivan, but it absolutely wasn't mine. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, staring intensely at the dark blue ink. Whoever had boldly signed my name had desperately tried to replicate my natural script. They had clearly practiced the long dramatic tail on my capital A, and the specific messy way I always loop my S. But it was a clumsy, pathetic attempt. The hard pen pressure was completely wrong. The slant of the letters was much too steep, leaning wildly to the right. The small lowercase letters didn't seamlessly connect the fluid way mine always do. It looked exactly like someone had nervously traced it from an old, discarded tax return, or maybe a dusty bank form hidden inside my childhood bedroom. It was just close enough to fool a busy venue coordinator who had absolutely no reason to question an older gentleman signing for his lovely daughter. Close enough to fool a complete stranger, but not nearly close enough to fool the woman who actually owned the name. I reached for my purse and pulled out my passport. I flipped it open to the official photo page and set it firmly on the desk, right next to the glowing laptop screen. My real, authentic signature sat right there, crisp and sharp in thick navy ink. It was firm, perfectly clean, and entirely unmistakable. The two signatures were staring at each other side by side. They did not match. "That is not my signature," I whispered out loud in the empty, silent hotel room. A strange, powerful heat started radiating from my chest, and I can actually prove it. My hands moved quickly. I grabbed my phone and dialed Rebecca. She answered on the very first frantic ring. "I am looking right at it," I announced breathlessly. "How bad is it?" Her voice was tight with anticipation. "It's my name, but it's written in someone else's nervous handwriting. It is honestly not even close, Rebecca." I heard a long, heavy exhale rush through the phone speaker. "That is textbook undeniable forgery, Amanda. Under strict South Carolina law, a totally forged guarantor agreement is automatically void from the very start. Legally, it never existed. You have zero financial liability." I slumped back into the cheap, stiff desk chair, staring blankly at the popcorn ceiling. My own parents didn't just lie about my character to my extended family. They physically became me on paper, in permanent ink, without a single shred of permission. "I'm coming over right now," Rebecca stated firmly. She arrived at the Marriott within an hour, a thick laptop tucked tightly under her arm, and a yellow legal pad already half covered in frantic scribbles. We sat close together at the tiny desk by the dusty window. 2 fresh, steaming coffees sat between us, and the damning PDF filled the screen. "Okay, here is exactly what we do next," she said, uncapping a black pen with a sharp click. "First, you need to write a highly formal letter directly to the venue's legal department. You must explicitly state that you did not sign the guarantor agreement. State clearly that the signature on file is absolutely not yours. And I officially request that they initiate an immediate signature verification process." I added smoothly, my compliance brain clicking perfectly into gear. "I will immediately attach a high-resolution scan of my passport page to provide my real signature for direct comparison." "Exactly," Rebecca nodded, writing fast. "We also must include a brief factual statement. You were not physically present when the fake document was signed. You were not informed of its actual existence by any party, and you did not legally authorize anyone to sign on your behalf." I hammered out the fierce letter in 25 flat minutes. Rebecca adjusted her glasses and proofread it twice. She tightened up 2 clunky sentences and strategically added a critical line demanding they preserve the original paper document for potential forensic police analysis. "What actually happens when the venue finally confirms the obvious forgery?" I asked quietly, staring at the flashing cursor. "All $42,000 falls right back onto the actual primary contracting party," Rebecca answered, looking right into my eyes. "Your loving parents and Penelope. And what if the venue aggressively reports it to local law enforcement?" Rebecca slowly looked at me over the thick rim of her reading glasses. "Forgery is a serious Class H felony in South Carolina. It carries up to 30 months in prison. But listen to me, Amanda, that is strictly the venue's decision to make, not yours. You aren't putting anyone in jail. All you are doing today is telling the truth to protect your own life." I nodded slowly, the terrifying weight of it settling onto my shoulders. "I don't want to press heavy criminal charges against my own dad." "You don't have to," she reassured me gently. "You just have to legally tell the truth." I took a deep breath, hovered my trembling finger over the mousepad, and clicked send. The formal letter, packed with explosive supporting documents, flew through the internet at exactly 3:15 p.m. via certified email. "Read receipt requested." I sat back hard and stared up at the ugly water stain on the ceiling. "Now what?" I whispered into the quiet room. "Now we wait for the angry venue to respond." Rebecca smiled faintly. "And we finally get ready for that family brunch." She smiled brightly. I didn't, but I also didn't book that terrifying, expensive flight home either. Wednesday afternoon arrived with a dull gray sky. Derek texted me again. "Brunch is 100% confirmed for Monday. Aunt Catherine's big house, 1 p.m. sharp. Your mom keeps happily calling it a warm family discussion. She told everyone the sweet goal is to simply help Amanda see reason." I read the chilling message while sitting alone in a small, crowded coffee shop near the hotel. Outside, Charleston's autumn light was thin and freezing gray. The busy parking lot smelled strongly of cold, wet asphalt and someone's greasy drive-through breakfast. Help Amanda see reason. That specifically meant they were planning to sit me down at a massive table, completely surrounded by angry people who had already decided I was a villain. They were going to apply crushing, public pressure until I finally broke down and wrote a massive check. I quickly texted Rebecca. "They're officially setting the stage. Monday. Aunt Catherine's house. "Are you actually going?" she asked instantly. "Yes. You sure about this?" "They desperately want a public conversation," I typed, my thumbs moving furiously. "So, they will definitely get one. Just not the version they rehearsed." My brutal plan was completely straightforward. I would bring exactly 3 powerful things to that table. The fake contract copy displaying the horribly forged signature, the fierce letter I had just sent to the venue's legal team, and my real, authentic passport flipped wide open to the signature page. There would be absolutely no dramatic speeches, no loud, crying accusations, just cold, silent paper. I would simply let the official documents do all the heavy speaking for me. That is exactly what I do for a living in Los Angeles. I lay clear documents onto a polished table and watch the entire room recalculate their lies. Derek sent another quick message to confirm the incoming guest list: George and Diane, Penelope and Thomas, Aunt Catherine and Uncle Robert, Cousin Brenda, Derek himself, a handful of other loud relatives, maybe 16 people in total. 16 people. One horribly forged signature, and an entire family that had been aggressively fed a fictional story about a monster that simply wasn't true. Diane had carefully organized this lovely brunch specifically to corner me like a frightened animal. She had carefully arranged the specific seating chart, ruthlessly controlled the fake narrative, and perfectly primed the angry audience. She honestly thought she was building a brilliant trap. She had absolutely no idea she was actually building my perfect stage. I ordered another strong black coffee, cracked open my glowing laptop, and meticulously reviewed the horrible contract one more time. I read every single tiny clause, every hidden line, every single letter of the name that someone else had desperately written. My name. Nobody signs it but me. Friday morning, the venue's legal department finally replied. The email was painfully short and highly professional, exactly the way incredibly serious things always are. Dear Miss Sullivan, we have officially received your formal, documented claim regarding the grantor agreement associated with the Sullivan-Richmond event. Upon preliminary review, we are immediately initiating a formal signature verification process. During the course of this active investigation, all aggressive collection activity directed at you personally has been fully suspended. We will legally notify all involved parties of the final outcome upon complete resolution. I read the incredible words 3 times. Then I forwarded it straight to Rebecca. They absolutely wouldn't suddenly suspend collection unless they clearly saw a massive discrepancy right away, Rebecca cheered when she called me seconds later. This is incredibly real, Amanda. They actually believe you. 2 long hours later, a second shocking email arrived. This one wasn't from the terrifying legal team. It was directly from Kelly Miller, the suite event coordinator. It was sent quietly from her own personal Wellington Manor address, with a simple subject line that just read, FYI, Miss Sullivan, I really shouldn't be telling you this, but I've been thinking about it non-stop since your desperate phone call. I was the actual employee who processed the original guarantor paperwork at the front desk. The person who excitedly dropped off the signed form was an older gentleman. He physically submitted the document at our counter and quickly signed it while standing right there in front of me. I remember it clearly because he seemed incredibly rushed and nervous. An older gentleman, sweating at the front desk, signing a critical legal form using someone else's identity. George, my own father, walked straight into that beautiful venue, picked up a cheap plastic pen, and confidently wrote my name as though it completely belonged to him. As though I completely belonged to him. I carefully saved both explosive emails. I marched down to the dusty hotel business center, printed crisp physical copies on their noisy printer, and slid them perfectly into a thick manila folder. The fake contract copy, the venue's fierce investigation letter, Kelly's damning witness statement, my authentic passport signature page. 4 powerful documents, clean, beautifully organized, completely unambiguous. I tucked the heavy folder securely into my carry-on bag and zipped it firmly shut. Monday was exactly 4 days away. The brunch was perfectly set. The angry audience was fully assembled. All that was left for me to do was finally show up and burn their fake world to the ground. Monday morning finally arrived. I woke up before the sun even started to rise. I carefully ironed a crisp white cotton blouse and paired it with a sharp navy blazer, dark trousers, and practical low heels. It was professional, completely controlled armor. This was the specific outfit of someone who came to present hard facts, not messy feelings. The thick manila folder sat waiting patiently on the small desk, the fake contract copy, the venue's legal letters, my open passport page. I slowly went through them one last, final time. Everything was in perfect order. Everything was undeniably legible. My phone buzzed right at 11 o'clock. It was Rebecca. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I am steady," I replied. My voice didn't shake at all. "Good," she encouraged. "Call me the exact second it's over." I drove to Aunt Catherine's house in total silence. It was a massive brick colonial sitting quietly in the wealthy South of Broad neighborhood. It featured a wide, welcoming front porch and a sensible minivan parked right in the driveway. 3 other familiar cars were already lined up along the curb. George's beat-up pickup truck, the shiny Escalade, which I now realized must have been a highly expensive rental just for the wedding weekend, Uncle Robert's older Buick, and a sleek silver Hyundai that I quickly assumed belonged to Penelope and Thomas. I parked my rental and sat frozen inside the car for a full, heavy minute. The engine was turned off. Both hands gripped the steering wheel tight. There were 16 people waiting inside that house. Most of them had already firmly made up their minds about me. Most of them had been eagerly fed a twisted version of events that painted me as the ultimate villain. The greedy, wealthy sister who made a beautiful promise and violently broke it. The monster who chose a bank account over her own family. I reached over for the thick folder resting on the passenger seat. I felt the solid weight of it in my hands. 4 documents, 12 pages, 1 undeniable truth. Then I took a deep breath, stepped out into the crisp air, locked the car doors, and marched straight up the front steps. The heavy oak door was completely unlocked. Stepping inside, the warm, comforting smell of baked quiche and fresh roasted coffee instantly hit me. But under that pleasant scent, I could hear the low, serious voices buzzing from the dining room. It was the distinct, terrifying sound of a pack of wolves bracing for a confrontation. I took a steadying breath and stepped fully into the room. 16 faces snapped toward me all at once. George spotted me first. His jaw instantly tightened like a vice. Diane offered a pathetic, wobbly smile that absolutely did not reach her cold eyes. Penelope immediately looked down at the expensive hardwood floor, refusing to make eye contact. I scanned the massive dining table. There was no empty chair waiting for me. Cousin Derek quickly stood up without a word and pulled a spare folding chair from the kitchen so I could sit down. "All right, just picture walking into that suffocating room. I have the explosive contract copy, the venue's legal letter, and my real signature ready for direct comparison. My big question for you is, what do you think I should do first? Option 1, instantly slam the contract onto the table and let the paper scream the truth. Option 2, let George and Diane spin their web of lies first, and then slowly tear it apart piece by piece. Or option 3, something totally different. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you have watched this far, you already know this crazy story deserves a share. Let's get back to the dining room. George stood tall at the very head of the long table. A shiny silver fork rested untouched on the edge of his plate. His posture was puffed up, radiating the fake confidence of a man who truly believes he owns every single room he enters. "I want to sincerely thank everyone for coming here today," he announced loudly, projecting his voice as though this were an important corporate board meeting and not a planned family ambush. "We are all gathered here because of an incredibly difficult situation. Amanda made a loving commitment to help pay for Penelope's beautiful wedding. She legally signed a contract with the venue, and now she is stubbornly refusing to honor it." Aunt Catherine nodded her head in deep, solemn agreement. Uncle Robert crossed his thick arms over his chest, looking completely disgusted. The entire room had eagerly chosen their side long before I even sat down. Diane jumped in right on cue, dramatically dabbing her dry eyes with a fancy cloth napkin. "We really didn't want this ugly mess to become public knowledge," she whined. "We have always handled our struggles privately, but Amanda has cruelly left us absolutely no choice." The sickening performance was incredibly polished. George flawlessly played the role of the deeply aggrieved patriarch. Diane nailed the part of the completely heartbroken mother. They had clearly rehearsed this exact script for days, or maybe they had simply lived inside their golden lie for so long that it actually felt like the truth to them. Then it was Penelope's turn. She was sitting close to her new husband Thomas at the far end of the table. Her eyes were puffy and red, her voice perfectly tiny and fragile. "I just wanted my big sister at my wedding," she whimpered. "I wrote her a sweet personal note. I happily invited her, and now she has turned my perfect day into a horrible fight about money." Thomas sat completely still beside her. He hadn't uttered a single word since I walked in. His dark brow was deeply creased, and his eyes kept darting around the room, taking everything in. George locked his eyes on me from across the table. He wore the triumphant, steady gaze of a hunter who is certain the trapped animal has nowhere left to run. Amanda, we are giving you one final chance to do the right thing in front of your entire family. I remained seated at the far edge of the room, the manila folder resting quietly on my lap. I hadn't spoken a single word yet. I purposely let them finish every single ridiculous sentence, every rehearsed toxic line, every fake tear. Let them build the rope, I thought grimly. They are going to need it. The angry family chorus started right on cue. Uncle Robert went first, his voice dripping with disappointment. Amanda, we have always proudly thought of you as the responsible one, the highly successful one. Just do the right thing here. Aunt Catherine chimed in, her tone sharp. Your poor parents could literally lose their family home over this mess. Is that really what you want to happen? Cousin Brenda barely looked up from her glowing phone screen. You earn incredibly good money out in California. Honestly, it's kind of embarrassing that this is even a conversation right now. Each judgmental voice landed like a heavy stone violently tossed onto a growing pile. They weren't asking me any questions. They were confidently delivering their guilty verdicts, but through it all, I kept my eyes locked directly on Thomas. He was slowly leaning back in his wooden chair, looking from George to Diane and then down to Penelope. He wore an expression I instantly recognized from my line of work. It was the horrifying look of someone carefully hearing a story for the very first time, and suddenly realizing the math absolutely does not add up. He leaned close to Penelope's ear and whispered, just loud enough for me to catch the words, "What contract?" Penelope panicked, quickly placing a trembling hand over his arm. "Shh," she hissed desperately. "I will completely explain it all later." But Thomas didn't look away from her face. His jaw shifted tightly. A dark seed of doubt had just been planted. George, fully emboldened by the room's blind compliance, turned back to me with a sickening smirk of triumph. "See, even your own extended family agrees with us. You made a solid commitment. We possess the contract. You willingly signed it. Just say yes, Amanda," Aunt Catherine pleaded loudly. "Just say you will kindly cover the bill, and we can all finally move forward together." 16 faces stared at me. 15 of them were eagerly waiting for me to crack and surrender. Only one person, Derek, sat quietly at the corner of the table, watching me with intense attention, almost as though his X-ray vision could see the explosive papers hiding inside the folder on my lap. George spread his large hands wide in a gesture of fake pity. She can't even try to defend herself, folks, because she knows she signed it. I stared right back at him. I held his arrogant, lying gaze for 4 full, agonizing seconds. Then I slowly stood up. My metal chair scraped loudly against the pristine hardwood floor. The entire noisy room instantly went dead quiet. "I have been quietly listening," I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy air like a razor blade. "Now it is officially my turn." I popped open the manila folder and deliberately placed the very first document right in the dead center of the table. The guarantor agreement, printed clearly on Wellington Manor letterhead. This piece of paper is the exact contract everyone has been aggressively talking about, the massive guarantor agreement for Penelope's luxury wedding. My name is printed right here. I pointed directly to the bottom line. But that is absolutely not my signature. Then I pulled out my actual passport and smacked it onto the wood right beside the fake contract. It was flipped open to the photo page. This is my real authentic signature, firm, slanted slightly left, the uniquely looped S and the long-tailed A that I have written the exact same way since I was 18 years old. Look at them side by side. Aunt Catherine grabbed the contract first. She held the paper directly next to my shiny passport, squinting her eyes tight. Uncle Robert leaned awkwardly over her shoulder to see. Cousin Brenda finally set her phone down onto the table for the first time all morning. The 2 signatures weren't even remotely close, not when you actually looked at them. Not when you finally bothered to search for the truth. The Wellington Manor has officially confirmed they are actively investigating this criminal forgery, I stated loudly. I placed the venue's legal letter right on top of the pile. During this formal investigation, all collection activity against me has been completely suspended. George's smug face instantly drained of all color. He went the sickly shade of wet cement. That's ridiculous," he stammered, his voice suddenly cracking. "You signed it quickly over the phone. Or electronically." "Dad," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly, chillingly level. The venue's lead event coordinator directly confirmed in writing that an older gentleman physically submitted this exact form in person, and he signed it while standing right there at the front desk. The entire room processed that explosive sentence in real time. I watched the horrible realization land heavily on Aunt Catherine's shocked face. I watched Uncle Robert's mouth fall open. I watched Thomas stare at his new father-in-law in absolute horror. George's mouth opened wide, like a fish gasping for air. But absolutely nothing came out. For the very first time in my entire life, I watched my arrogant father have nothing to say. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. The forged signature was only the beginning of his crimes, and the next piece of paper in my folder was about to prove he didn't just steal my name, he stole a whole lot more. Then, I didn't stop. The breathless, suffocating silence in the room became my personal runway. They thought I was just a walking checkbook, a voice whispered in my mind. They thought I would break, not today. You really thought you were clever, Dad, I said, my voice slicing effortlessly through the heavy, tense air. I reached deep into my bag and threw the crumpled yellow legal papers straight onto the polished wood, right next to the fake contract. Cousin Derek actually found your little art project sitting in the office trash. 36 frantic practice runs of my signature. George physically recoiled in his chair, his face completely drained of all remaining blood, turning a sickly, chalky white. Aunt Catherine gasped out loud, her hand flying to cover her mouth. But you didn't just casually forge a piece of paper, I continued, moving much faster now, absolutely refusing to give any of them a single second to breathe or spin a lie. I slammed a freshly printed screenshot onto the table. You actively created a fake email address, amanda.sullivan@gmail.com, and you confidently forged a power of attorney to bypass the venue's strict security. That, Dad, is federal wire fraud. Diane started to sob. It wasn't the pretty, rehearsed crying from earlier. It was a high-pitched, panicked, hyperventilating sound of a woman watching her entire fake world collapse. I completely ignored her and pulled out the final, deadly document. And let's not forget the beautiful cherry on top, a $15,000 secret personal loan you illegally took out in my name at SunTrust Bank, just to pay for the pretty flowers and the catering. Uncle Robert accidentally knocked his heavy water glass over. It shattered violently against the hardwood floor, sending ice and water everywhere, but absolutely nobody moved a muscle. $57,000 of felony identity theft, I finished coldly. Aunt Catherine spoke first. She slowly set the contract copy down on the table as though the paper had physically burned her fingers. George, is this true? Did you actually sign her name? It was for Penelope. His voice cracked horribly on the second word. He looked around the room, desperately begging for an ally. We had absolutely no other option. Our credit was completely destroyed after the store went under. The venue strictly required a guarantor. We didn't mean to. You committed forgery, Uncle Robert boomed, standing up so fast his chair wobbled. His face was deeply flushed from the collar up. On your own daughter's name? George, do you clearly understand that is a massive felony? Diane reached out and grabbed George's trembling arm. We were desperate. You don't know what it's been like for us. Desperate? Aunt Catherine's voice was a sharp, swinging blade. Diane, I stood in my kitchen and asked you to your face last month if Amanda had agreed to help pay for this. You looked me dead in the eye, smiled, and said yes. Diane's mouth opened, but she said nothing. There was nowhere left to hide. At the far end of the long table, Thomas suddenly pushed his chair back. The harsh scraping sound echoed off the walls. He turned his body completely toward Penelope. Wait, he demanded, his voice thick with confusion. You explicitly told me your parents were generously covering the venue. You told me Amanda was just helping out with the flowers as a sweet gift. Penelope panicked, reaching out with both hands for his arm. Thomas, please just sit down. You knew? His tone wasn't loud. It was actually much worse than loud. It was the terrifying, hollow voice of a man rapidly recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the person sitting next to him. You knew your own dad forged your sister's name on a legal contract, and you sat there and said absolutely nothing? It was incredibly complicated, she pleaded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. It's a crime, Penelope, Thomas barked, pulling his arm away from her grip. It's not complicated. It is a literal crime. I pulled my cell phone from my blazer pocket. Oh, and Penelope, since you just bravely told your new husband you had absolutely no idea. I hit play. The crystal-clear audio recording from my dark hotel room ambush completely filled the dead silence of the dining room. Penelope's own voice echoed from the tiny speaker, sounding sharp, spoiled, and completely hysterical. Whatever. Dad had to do it. We didn't have a choice. I knew he was using your SSN, but I thought you'd just eat the cost to keep the peace. Thomas slowly turned and looked at Penelope like she was an absolute monster. He didn't just push his chair back this time. He grabbed it and threw it out of his way to put distance between them. The room had permanently split. The illusion was dead. George and Diane sat frozen on one side, completely pinned under the weight of their own crimes, totally exposed to the family they had tried to impress. Penelope sat weeping beside them, desperately trying to grab Thomas's hand while he physically backed away toward the wall. And there was me, standing perfectly tall at the end of the table with an open empty folder, saying absolutely nothing more. I don't need to shout, I realized. The truth is loud enough on its own. I didn't need to argue. The legal documents were doing exactly what documents are supposed to do. The room was aggressively fracturing. Angry voices started overlapping. Diane crying hysterically. Uncle Robert loudly demanding real answers from George. Thomas just staring at his crying bride like he had never actually seen her real face before. I raised one single hand. I am not done. Silence, immediate, breathless silence fell over the room again. I am not pressing criminal charges, I stated calmly. That is not why I flew here today. I slowly looked at every single person sitting at that table, making direct eye contact one by one. But I want every single person in this room to clearly understand 3 specific things. I held up one finger. 1. Tokens Nam. I never signed that fake contract or that loan. I have zero legal or moral obligation to pay a single dollar of that $42,000 debt. I held up a second finger. 2 tokens. I flew 16 painful hours across the country just to be at Penelope's wedding. I stood freezing outside that venue with an actual invitation in my hand, and I was thrown away at the door by the exact same man who forged my name, because he was terrified I would walk inside and find out the truth. I held up a third finger. 3 tokens. I honestly don't hate anyone in this room, but I will absolutely not carry heavy debts that were never mine. And I will never ever apologize for refusing to be used. Diane's broken voice pushed through her loud sobs. Amanda, please. Mom loves you. I slowly lowered my hand. I am officially done being the person you only call when you desperately need something signed, paid for, or blamed. George still hadn't spoken a word. He was just staring blankly down at the forged contract on the table like it was a horrifying mirror showing him his true reflection. I gathered my original documents slowly and deliberately. I placed my passport and the letters carefully back into the thick folder. Kindness is not a binding contract, I said softly into the quiet room. And being family is not a blank check. I tucked the folder securely under my arm. I turned and walked right past the long table, past the untouched quiche, past the cooling coffee, and past the heavy silence. Cousin Derek briefly met my eyes as I passed his chair. He gave me a small, firm nod of deep respect. I walked out the heavy front door, marched down the brick porch steps, and stepped into the thin, bright autumn light. Nobody chased after me. Nobody screamed my name. But this time, the absolute silence behind me didn't feel like cruel rejection. It felt like pure, undeniable respect. I was halfway down the sidewalk to my rental car when I clearly heard them through the open dining room window. It was Thomas's voice. It was tight, furiously controlled, but it carried perfectly into the street. You lied to my face about the money. You lied to everyone about your sister. What else did you completely lie about, Penelope? Thomas, please, I didn't lie, we handled it differently then. Your father committed a major felony, and you absolutely knew. It wasn't like that, she sobbed. Then tell me exactly what it was like, Thomas roared. Because from where I am standing, I just married into a sick family that actively forges legal documents and throws innocent people out of weddings just to cover it up. I didn't linger to hear the rest. I opened the car door, gently set the manila folder onto the passenger seat, and started the rumbling engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw Cousin Derek walk out the front door and casually stroll down the porch steps. He jogged over to my driver's side window. I rolled it down. That took serious guts, he said quietly, a small smile playing on his lips. You're the one who secretly sent me the screenshots and the notepad. You did plenty on your own. He shoved his hands deep into his jacket pockets. Uncle George hasn't even looked up from the table. Aunt Diane is completely locked inside the guest bathroom. Penelope is frantically trying to keep Thomas from packing his bags. Is he actually leaving? I asked. I don't know for sure, but he just told her he desperately needs space. I heard Penelope say something to him about canceling the big honeymoon. I let that massive update settle in my mind. The Fairmont Resort in Bora Bora. The luxurious trip they had smugly teased on Instagram 3 weeks ago. Gone. Evaporated into thin air. Amanda. Derek added softly. For what it's absolutely worth, most of the room is totally on your side now. Aunt Catherine just told Uncle George he should be deeply ashamed of himself. And that is coming from Aunt Catherine. Thanks, Derek, for everything. He stepped back from the car. Drive safe. I pulled smoothly away from the large brick colonial and didn't look back in the rearview mirror a single time. The long highway was beautifully empty, the southern sky was incredibly wide and bright, and I drove with the radio completely turned off. Some silences are earned, and this one is entirely mine. Tuesday morning, I was standing in the busy hotel lobby, finally checking out at the front desk, when the final email officially arrived from the Wellington Manor Legal Department. Subject: Guarantor Agreement Determination. Dear Miss Sullivan, following our rapid internal investigation, including professional handwriting comparison and direct witness statements from our venue staff, we have conclusively determined that the grantor signature on the event guarantee agreement dated September 13th does not match the verified signature of Amanda Sullivan. Accordingly, the grantor agreement is hereby voided in its entirety. All financial liability for the outstanding balance of $42,000 completely reverts to the primary contracting parties, George Sullivan and Diane Sullivan. A revised invoice will be issued directly to the primary parties under separate cover. A second, separate email followed almost immediately from Marcus Vance, the aggressive finance director. Miss Sullivan, on behalf of Wellington Manor, I sincerely apologize for my previous tone and threats. We have officially reported the forged power of attorney to our internal fraud department. Your employer will absolutely not be contacted. I read the incredible words while standing frozen at the polished counter. My suitcase handle gripped tightly in one hand, my glowing phone in the other, voided in its entirety. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for a week completely dissolved. The polite desk clerk asked if I needed anything else. I smiled brightly and said no. I walked out to my rental car, sat quietly in the driver's seat, and read the magical email one more time. Then I called Rebecca. It's done, I announced, leaning my head back against the seat. Tell me everything, she demanded happily. Voided, all of it. The massive liability reverted directly back to George and Diane. She let out a massive, joyful breath. You owe absolutely nothing. I owe nothing. A brand new email had literally just come in while I was talking on the phone. It was the venue's massive, revised invoice, sent directly to George and Diane. I was simply CC'd on the message for my own records. Please immediately remit payment of $42,000 within 90 days. Failure to strictly comply will result in aggressive legal action. 90 days, $42,000 for a single flashy party they threw just to prove they were something they absolutely weren't. A party proudly signed with a name that was never theirs to use. I confidently set my phone in the cup holder and drove straight to the airport. The flight home to California was 16 long hours. I slept peacefully for 12 of them. It was the deepest, most beautiful sleep I had experienced in weeks. My financial life was finally safe, and I was going home. But the emotional shockwave of what I left behind in that dining room was about to follow me all the way across the country. Penelope called 4 days later. I was officially back in Los Angeles, standing quietly in the sleek kitchen of my Century City condo. I held a warm mug, simply watching the vast ocean turn a brilliant shimmering silver in the late afternoon light. When I answered, my sister's voice sounded entirely different. It was incredibly small, fragile. The loud, entitled bravado that usually fueled her was completely gone. There was no more screaming to just write the check because I could afford it. Thomas actually canceled Bora Bora, she whispered into the receiver. He says he can't trust me again until I am fully honest about everything, every single detail. She is finally looking in the mirror, I thought, and she hates the reflection. He wants me to use the honeymoon deposit to help pay the angry venue back, she continued, her breath shaking. $9,000, all of it. Are you going to do it? I asked softly. A long, painful silence stretched across the country. I think I have to. I poured a little more hot water over my tea bag and let the heavy pause sit between us. Amanda, I really need help, she pleaded, her tone cracking. Would you please call Thomas? Tell him I'm not a terrible person. Tell him I just made a mistake. Please. I closed my eyes. That is your marriage, Penelope. Those are your own words to find. I cannot be your bridge. Not when you are the exact person who burned ours to the ground. She started crying. Not the pretty, performative tears she had staged at the family brunch. These were real, ugly tears, the specific kind that fall when you have completely run out of clever angles, and the only thing left in the room is the awful shape of what you actually did. I was wrong, she sobbed. I know I was so wrong. Knowing you were wrong isn't the same thing as fixing it. Then how do I fix this? You start with the ugly truth, I told her firmly. With Thomas, with yourself. You stop treating other people's names like unlimited resources you are naturally entitled to. The call ended a minute later. There was no magical resolution, no tearful movie ending with a group hug. Just two sisters separated by a massive ocean and a devastating forgery. We were standing in the cold distance that honesty creates right before it finally begins to heal. I drank my tea by the glowing window and watched a tiny white boat move slowly down the bay. Some things take real time. I am finally learning to let them. George called me on a Friday. It was late afternoon his time, early evening mine. I was reviewing a thick client report at my desk when his familiar name unexpectedly flashed across my screen. I almost didn't answer, but the broken man who spoke wasn't the arrogant giant I expected. The venue is officially threatening to sue us, his voice rasped. It carried no sharp edge, no booming authority. It sounded exactly like a voice that had been neatly folded up and put away in a dark drawer. I'm going to have to sell my truck and some of the heavy equipment from the store. You put yourself in this exact position, Dad. I know. 2 tiny words. There was no angry deflection today. No fake buddy offering terrible legal advice. No screaming about me being an ungrateful daughter. Just a hollow I know. I honestly didn't think, he trailed off, taking a ragged breath before trying again. I thought you would just pay it. I thought that's exactly what you do. I figured because you had the money, you'd cover the bill and never ask any questions. Yes, I replied, the truth tasting bitter in my mouth. Because that is what I have always done. Handled my own pain quietly, flown back to Los Angeles, never made a scene. Yes, he admitted weakly. I looked out my window at the glittering lights stringing along the busy boulevard below. A towering metal crane was working on a new high-rise building across the street, its warning light blinking bright red in the descending dark. There's something else, my father confessed, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The venue was just the big one. I also signed your name on the rental agreement for the tables and the fancy chairs. That was another $5,000. I gripped the phone tighter. He just kept digging the hole deeper, and the $15,000 cash loan from SunTrust, I added coldly, doing the brutal math in my head. That makes $62,000, Dad. $62,000 in my name, without a single word of warning. He didn't argue, he just breathed. Dad, I am not going to lecture you tonight. The venue has permanently voided the contract. I am officially out. Whatever happens to you next, the crushing payments, losing the truck, the legal consequences, those belong entirely to you. I am so sorry, Amanda. I hear you. I truly mean it. I know you do. But sorry doesn't magically erase a forged signature. And it certainly doesn't erase being told I am not family while standing outside my own sister's wedding. He was quiet for a very long time. I know, he repeated softly, and hung up the phone. I had already been safely back in Los Angeles for a full week by then. But the crazy story kept settling inside my chest like fine dirt in a glass of water. Slowly, layer by careful layer, until you could finally see all the way through to the clear bottom. The crisp morning after George's confession, I went for a long walk along the lively Venice boardwalk before work. The ocean was the exact color of polished pewter, and the salty breeze was cold enough to pleasantly sting my cheeks. I passed the usual morning joggers, and the same older man walking his scruffy terrier near the pier. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Aunt Catherine. Amanda, I owe you a massive apology. A real one. I should have asked for your side of the story before I blindly took anyone's word. I am deeply sorry. Then Uncle Robert. A direct text message this time, not a preachy email. I said awful things I shouldn't have. I was completely wrong. Cousin Derek, you are the strongest person I know. Seriously. I read each glowing message while sitting on a wooden bench near the crashing waves. 3 real apologies from people who had been totally ready to cut me off just a week ago. But there was absolutely nothing from George. Nothing from Diane. Nothing from Penelope. The only 3 people who actually owed me the healing words remained silent. I slid my phone back into my pocket and watched a pristine sailboat cut smoothly through the gray water. Winning this war didn't feel the way I originally expected. I had foolishly imagined something incredibly clean, a bright sense of perfect closure, a heavy door clicking firmly shut forever. Instead, it felt exactly like scrubbing out a deep infected wound. It was highly necessary. It was unavoidable to survive. But it still stung like crazy. Rebecca called that evening. How are you feeling? Honestly, relieved, sad, exhausted, I confessed, resting my head against the cool glass of my living room window. All 3 at the exact same time. That sounds about right, she hummed gently. Then, she seamlessly pivoted and told me about a boring new case at her law firm, a simple contractor dispute over broken tiles. Nothing highly dramatic, normal things, grounding, human things. It was the exact same quiet comfort she had given me in that stuffy hotel room the night I almost booked the cowardly flight home. Some people hold you up by being extraordinary, I realized happily. Rebecca holds me up by just being steady. 4 months later, life looked drastically different for everyone involved. George was forced to sell the shiny Cadillac Escalade. It turned out to be a ridiculous 48-month lease he had taken out specifically to look rich for the wedding weekend. Just another sad performance. He also liquidated whatever valuable inventory was left sitting inside the dying building supply store. Between giving up the truck, selling the heavy equipment, and securing a small pity loan from Uncle Robert, my father managed to pay $24,000 toward the massive venue debt. He also managed to quickly clear the fraudulent $15,000 bank loan just to successfully avoid facing federal wire fraud charges. The remaining balance, roughly $23,000 including the fake table rentals, was currently being fiercely negotiated into a strict monthly payment plan. $600 a month. George and Diane's peaceful retirement timeline was instantly pushed back by at least 5 hard years. Diane finally had to get a real job. For the first time in 31 years, my mother was working as a part-time cashier at a busy grocery store right on King Street. I heard all this colorful news from Derek, not from her. Penelope and Thomas were surprisingly still together, but the magical honeymoon was permanently gone. Penelope had tearfully surrendered the entire $9,000 Bora Bora deposit directly toward her parents' venue debt. They were currently sitting in intense couples counseling twice a week. That was Thomas's strict condition for staying in the marriage. He bluntly told Penelope that total financial transparency wasn't an option anymore. Every single bank account, every credit card statement, every single dollar spent had to be tracked and accounted for. The Wellington Manor ultimately chose not to pursue harsh criminal charges against my father. In most messy civil matters like this, giant companies rarely do. Setting up a guaranteed payment plan is much cheaper and faster than a lengthy court prosecution. George would not have a permanent felony record ruining his name, but he would carry a crushing debt, a permanently damaged reputation, and the agonizing knowledge that he had been totally exposed in front of every single person whose respect he had spent a lifetime desperately performing for. Then, in late April, a soft paper letter arrived at my condo. There was no return address printed on the envelope, but I instantly recognized the handwriting. Diane's careful, slanted cursive print. It was very short, just one single page. "I know I have absolutely no right to ask you for anything," she wrote, "but I want you to know that I am finally learning what it actually means to earn a relationship, instead of just demanding one." I gently set the letter down on my kitchen table, right next to my steaming tea. I didn't write her back, not because I was still furious, but simply because I wasn't ready yet. And for the very first time in my entire life, I allowed that feeling to be enough. Los Angeles carried on beautifully around me. The vast ocean changed color with the warming seasons, shifting from winter pewter to dark slate to something brilliantly close to emerald green when spring finally arrived. I went to work. I read thick corporate contracts. I cleverly caught tiny discrepancies that saved my clients thousands of dollars they would never even know about. And I went home to my safe condo in Century City, made hot tea, and looked out the bright window. But something deep inside my chest had permanently shifted. I started happily saying yes to things I used to automatically decline. A friendly colleague's random dinner invitation. A fun, messy weekend trip up to Seattle with Rebecca when she came to visit me in May. An unexpected phone call from cousin Derek that lasted a full hour, covering absolutely nothing important, and yet everything that truly mattered. For years, I had deeply confused self-reliance with brutal isolation. I had carefully built a protective life that was clean, highly ordered, and entirely mine. And somewhere along the lonely way, mine had sadly started to mean alone. The terrifying trip to Charleston didn't magically fix all my trauma, but it finally cracked the thick brick wall around my heart, just enough to let the warm light peek in. In early June, I picked up my phone and called Penelope. It was a very short, quiet call. There was absolutely no mention of the fake contract, the angry venue, or the missing $42,000. There were no dramatic apologies, and zero bitter accusations. It was just two sisters softly talking for the very first time in a way that didn't have a secret, toxic agenda hiding underneath it. "How is work?" she asked nervously. "Busy, but good busy. How's Thomas?" We are working on it together. The counseling really helps." "Good. Amanda?" She paused. "Yeah. I am really glad you called." That was it. No grand reconciliation, no sweeping forgiveness montage with swelling music. Just a heavy door bravely left open a tiny crack, not because anyone had perfectly earned it yet, but simply because keeping it locked shut was slowly costing me way more energy than I realized. True strength isn't about carrying everyone else's heavy weight on your back. It is about knowing exactly which burdens belong to you, and boldly putting down the ones that don't. I had finally put mine down. My hands were completely free. It is evening in Los Angeles now. The wide sky over Century City is fading into that particular breathtaking shade of blue it only gets in late spring. Deep and bruised at the very edges, pale and golden right where the city lights proudly meet the dark ocean. I am sitting quietly at the big window in my living room, holding a cup of Earl Grey tea that has gone slightly lukewarm, which is exactly how I prefer it, if I am being totally honest. I think about that horrible day sometimes. The loud crunching of the gravel path beneath my shoes, the smell of the imported white peonies, the elegant string quartet playing beautiful music through the glass doors of a venue I wasn't allowed to enter. Leave, only family is allowed. My father spat those cruel words at me while standing fiercely in front of a door he had already locked, and in a strange, twisted way he was entirely right. Only true family was allowed inside. The massive problem was, he had completely forgotten who his real family actually was. He tragically forgot that family isn't a fake performance you stage for an impressed audience. It isn't a forged contract you sneakily sign using someone else's hand. It isn't a massive, crushing bill you slide across a wooden table and expect someone else to pay just because they happen to share your blood type. Family is the genuine people who eagerly show up, not because they legally owe you anything, but because they actively choose to. It is Rebecca, who brought hot coffee to a freezing hotel room and strictly told me to close the laptop. It is cousin Derek, who bravely dug through the trash and sent a secret screenshot that changed the entire war. It is the brand new version of Penelope who answered the phone in June and said, "I am really glad you called," and actually meant it. I look over at my blue passport resting safely on the bookshelf. The dark ink signature resting inside those pages is entirely mine, clean, certain, unforged. My name is Amanda Sullivan. I am 35 years old. I work in corporate compliance. I live happily alone in a beautiful condo by the water, and I am learning, still slowly learning every single day, that saying a firm no to the toxic things that hurt you is the exact same thing as saying a massive yes to who you truly are. Nobody signs my name but me, and that is enough. That is finally beautifully enough. That is my story. Before you leave, let me ask you one final question. When was the exact moment you realized you had to stop setting yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm? If you're still here, thank you so much for listening. If this crazy journey resonated with your heart, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Option 1. Have you ever had to set a brutal boundary with your own toxic family, even when it cost you something huge? Option 2. Have you ever been treated like the designated family ATM, the one everyone frantically calls when they need something, but never when they just want to say hello? Or option 3. Tell me something completely different. Share your own survival story, your own brave words, and drop it all down in the comments below. And if you want to hear more intense true stories exactly like this one, check the description box. I've linked a few wild ones that hit just as hard. Until next time, please remember your name. Your signature belongs entirely to you. Do not ever let anyone else write it for you.